She needs positive energy only, okay? Please don't come. That's what my sister said. Not thank you.
Not sorry.
Just that. After I spent $16,000 of my savings to cover her daughter's emergency surgery.
Hi.
My name is Jordan Alara. I'm 32. And if you think you know how this ends, stay tuned. Because I've never been good at being the villain in their version of the story. I'm the fixer. The calm one. The one they call when it all falls apart. But that night, when I opened the group chat and saw photos of the recovery party, the pink balloons, the matching family shirts, the caption that read, "We're surrounded by love, two hearts, #family first," my chest got tight. They'd invited everyone, even family members I hadn't seen in years. Everyone but me. The woman who paid the bill,
Who cried outside the ICU.
who lied to her landlord to stall rent so her niece could get the procedure in time. And now, I was too negative. I didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't send a passive-aggressive text. I just booked a one-way solo trip. Somewhere warm. No itinerary. No explanation. The next day, I put my phone on airplane mode and walked barefoot down a quiet beach. I breathed. For the first time in weeks, maybe months. And told myself, let them notice the silence. They did. Because 5 days later, the hospital called them about a suspended account. And suddenly, I wasn't just invited back into their lives. They were at my door. It started with a voicemail. "Hi, Jordan, it's me. Just wondering if we can talk about the hospital thing." No apology. No, thank you for paying.
Just the hospital thing.
I didn't respond. Then came the group text. My mom. "Sweetheart, can you give your sister a call? She's overwhelmed." Overwhelmed? Was she exhausted from choosing balloon colors while I negotiated a $16,000 down payment? I stayed quiet. That's when the hospital billing department finally sent the family the second invoice. The first had been in my name. The second, redirected to my sister's account. Apparently, she'd insisted on being listed as the guardian for legal reasons.
Oops.
That new bill? $4,650, due immediately. Because my last transfer had been reversed. I'd called the hospital from the airport. Explained the situation with brutal clarity. I was emotionally manipulated into covering costs. I've withdrawn financial consent. Kindly remove my name from all future correspondence.
They did.
Now it was on her. And she wasn't ready for that. 14 missed calls in 2 hours. 3 different family members trying to guilt-trip me with soft voices and vague shame. "Jordan, it's not the time for drama. She's going through so much. Family doesn't keep score." But I did. I'd kept score for years. Every borrowed dollar. Every canceled weekend. Every time I covered rent while they posted brunch photos. Now, the silence was loud. And for the first time, my absence was more noticeable than my presence ever was. I didn't disappear out of anger. I disappeared to see who would notice the weight I'd been holding. And the weight was crashing down on them, fast. Because what came next wasn't just financial fallout. It was a chain reaction. By day 5, it wasn't just my sister calling. It was her fiancé. Then her best friend. Then a message request from a woman I didn't even know. "Hi, Jordan. I'm Ashley. I handle the venue bookings for children's parties in Pinebrook. There's a little issue with the final payment." I stared at the message. A children's recovery party. With a $2,300 catering tab. And balloons. And a magician. All charged, guess where? The same credit card I'd canceled mid-flight. They'd booked it before asking me. Just assumed I'd handle it. Now vendors were demanding payment. The venue was threatening small claims court, and everyone was realizing the Bank of Jordan was closed. Then came the worst blow. A blog post. From the hospital's charity partner. They'd shared a photo of my niece in recovery, smiling, strong, along with a caption. "Thanks to the incredible generosity of her aunt, this brave girl got a second chance at life." The post went viral in our local community. And suddenly, I was the center of attention. Not for drama, but for quiet kindness. Local news reached out. My old high school teacher sent flowers. My landlord even wrote me a thank you note with $100 off rent. My sister? She was humiliated. Because in every comment section, people were praising me. Not her. Not her parents.
Me.
She called again, this time sobbing. You made me look like a bad mother. I replied, calm and cold. You did that all on your own. And that's when she whispered the words I'd never heard from her in 3 decades of sisterhood. Please help me. But I wasn't done learning how far they'd go. What I found next in my mailbox wasn't a thank you card. It was a summons. I held the envelope under my kitchen light, heart thudding. Jordan Carter, defendant. Case no hashtag 8429 CV. Breach of verbal contract. Filed by my sister. She was suing me for emotional damages and financial sabotage, claiming I intentionally canceled payments after agreeing to cover them. Said I caused public embarrassment. Said her daughter's health was at risk because of me. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From something deeper. Older. This was what it had always been. Manipulation in designer clothing. I called a lawyer. A pro bono women's legal clinic handled the first consultation. They read the claim and laughed out loud. This'll get thrown out faster than a junk mail coupon. Still, I prepared. I gathered texts, voicemails, the invoice trail, bank receipts, that hospital post, time-stamped and viral. At the hearing, my sister arrived in pearls and crocodile tears. She sobbed about betrayal, about broken promises, about sisterhood. The judge, an older black woman with silver hair and a steel gaze, listened quietly. Then she turned to me. Miss Carter, do you have anything to say? I stood. Not angry, just clear. I didn't abandon my niece. I paid for her life-saving care. What I won't pay for, ever again, is being used. The judge nodded once.
Sharp.
Final. Case dismissed. Plaintiff is advised to reassess her definition of family. My sister burst into tears again, but no one followed her out this time. Not even our mom. Outside the courthouse, the sun hit my face. I had a voicemail from a hospital. A nurse I'd never met. Jordan, I don't know what you did, but your niece's recovery is ahead of schedule. She keeps asking when she'll see you again. That was the only courtroom victory I needed. But part 5? That's when my mom finally showed up, not with apologies, but with a request. Mom showed up on my doorstep 4 days after court. Not crying. Not angry. Just tired. A silk scarf draped around her shoulders like a peace flag. I don't want to fight, she said. I just want to talk. I didn't step aside. I waited. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper. A copy of the GoFundMe she'd secretly created for my niece's recovery, one that had raised over $12,000 using my name, my story, and my photo, without my consent. I didn't mean for it to go viral, she mumbled. But people cared. It helped. I stared at her. You raised money using me and didn't tell me? She flinched, then tried to justify. It was for your niece. You said you didn't want to help anymore. I said I wouldn't be used anymore. I cut in. There's a difference. She begged me not to report it. Said it would shame the family. Do you want the world to think we're scammers? I took the paper from her hand, folded it slowly, then said, You already did that part. She cried, the kind of crying meant to soften someone. But I didn't soften. I closed the door. Then I called the GoFundMe support line. Reported the misuse. Attached screenshots. Proof. The campaign was shut down within hours. Donations frozen. Funds redirected to the hospital account in my niece's name. That same night, my niece messaged me. Auntie J, Mom's crying again. But I told her I'm proud of you. You're the only one who shows up for real. I sat with that. With the quiet. With the ache. With the unexpected bloom of peace. But I wasn't finished yet. Because someone else had also used that campaign. And part 6 is when I found out who. It started with an email. Subject line. Urgent, GoFundMe press inquiry. I blinked. Inside was a note from a journalist who'd seen the now-deleted fundraiser. They were doing a feature on viral donation scams and had questions, including why the campaign had linked to a local real estate business as its withdrawal account.
Wait. What?
I read it twice. Then opened the cached fundraiser page. Scrolled to the fine print. And there it was. The connected withdrawal account didn't say my mom's name.
It said,
Sterling View Realty, LLC. My sister's husband's company. Ezra. Of course. I knew they'd always been close. But this? Using my niece's pain. My contribution as a front for their own gain? My hands shook as I opened my banking app. Cross-referenced the wire I'd sent the hospital. I hadn't noticed it then, but the account number wasn't the one I had on file for billing. They'd rerouted the funds. Through manipulation. Through back-end changes. And through me. They had likely paid part of the bill. Enough to keep me quiet. But the rest?
Siphoned.
It wasn't about my niece anymore. It was about laundering compassion into a profit. And suddenly, the party I hadn't been invited to, the unspoken cold shoulders, it all made sense. I wasn't bad energy. I was inconvenient. Because people who pay attention notice where the money flows. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to my sister. Not to Ezra. But to the local district attorney's office, attaching all the evidence. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that builds before a storm. By morning, the silence had cracked. Mom was at my door. No calls. No texts. Just her, standing there with the kind of brittle smile you wear when you know the truth is catching up. She didn't ask to come in. She walked straight to my kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and sat like she still owned the place. I heard, she said, voice thin, about the letter. I didn't answer. She stared at me, then added, It's not what you think. Ezra made decisions. But we were trying to protect you. You're always so sensitive. I almost laughed. Sensitive? I funded your daughter's surgery. I kept your lights on for 3 years. And you still labeled me bad energy. She stood, the mask slipping. You're going to ruin us. No, I said quietly. You did that when you turned compassion into a con. She opened her mouth, but just then a knock at the door. I didn't have to guess who it was. A woman in a gray blazer stood there, badge visible, notepad ready. Behind her, another officer. Are you Miss Caldwell? I nodded. We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding an open financial misconduct case. We have a report of fraudulent fundraising, misuse of healthcare funds, and unauthorized rerouting of bank transactions. I stepped aside. My mother's face drained of color. I didn't, she began. But her voice was already too late. They didn't come to accuse me. They came because I was the witness. The whistleblower. I watched as she sat down on my couch, trembling, answering questions she never thought would be asked. That night, I lit a candle by my window. Not for revenge, but for justice that finally remembered my name. The newspaper never printed my name. Just a quiet blur buried between weather forecasts and sports scores. Local family under investigation for medical fund misappropriation. Charges pending. But I clipped it anyway. Taped it to the inside of my kitchen cabinet. Not for pride, but for clarity. My sister sent a voice note a week later. It started with sobbing. Then begging. Then bargaining. She said the party was never meant to exclude me, that I misunderstood everything. That family is messy, but love is real. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because sometimes healing means choosing silence over reopening wounds for someone else's comfort. The hospital called again. This time, to tell me the debt was cleared. A donor, anonymous, had paid the remaining $4,000. I knew it was Sarah. No message. No credit. Just grace. And so I did what felt right. I took the money I'd saved for next month's rent and booked a tiny cabin by the lake. Just me, a journal, and an old paperback I hadn't touched in years. On the first morning there, I brewed my own coffee, walked outside barefoot, let the light fall across my face like forgiveness. No texts, no guilt, no titles like The Outsider. Just me, the woman who used to beg for a seat at the table, now building her own table beneath a sky too wide to be owned. As the wind kissed the pine trees and silence wrapped around me like a soft coat, I whispered, "You'll never steal my peace again." They say healing is loud.
But mine?
It arrived in the form of stillness. And for the first time in years, I felt whole.